Hey guys, tonight we tumble, not just into bed, but back in time about 150 years back, right into the busy, noisy, and shockingly untidy heart of Victorian London. The moment you open your eyes, you're slammed with the thick, muggy sweep of the infamous city air. Carriages clatter over cobblestones, costermongers yell about their bruised apples, and somewhere nearby, a distant factory whistle screams a warning that, if you're honest, you probably should have heeded. Every inch of the streets is busy with women in towering hats, boys in flat caps darting between horses, and banners advertising spectacles so wild, you have to blink twice to believe them. You try not to focus on the heavy stink something between burnt coal, boiled cabbage, and, unsettlingly, something else. You probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where are you listening from, and what time is it for you tonight? Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city envelops you, its noise sticking to you like soot. Already confused and more than a little worried, you didn't double knot your sneakers, you realize you're stuck in ill-fitting boots. There's a dampness to everything, including your socks, and the street you're on is so cramped you could, if you reached out, ruffle the top hat of the man next to you, but you absolutely shouldn't, unless you want to learn some extremely creative British insults. Underfoot, the pavement is slick both from morning rain and, as you realize, far less sanitary sources. Children run by, some laughing, some scowling, and at least one holding a rat triumphantly over his head as an older woman scolds him for spoiling good supper. A police constable eyes you suspiciously. You awkwardly tug at your collar, even as your skin itches beneath the odd, heavy fabric. Victorian London is teeming not the picturesque cobblestone fantasy of children's books and period dramas. Here, poverty isn't atmospheric, it's suffocating. In fact, about 1 in every 3 people around you lives in notorious slums, and fun history facts, some have their entire families crammed in a single room barely 6 feet across. There's a certain frantic energy, a pulsing heartbeat of survival, but also deep exhaustion in everyone's faces. A woman selling violets half smiles at you, with only 2 good teeth, her voice hoarse from screaming her wares all morning. Newspaper boys dodge between footsteps and horse dung. You quickly learn to watch your step or risk bringing home a very pungent souvenir. Historians still argue whether the true source of the London smell was more the coal smoke of the sewage wafting from the Thames. But there's no denying that your nose is overwhelmed. For a moment you inhale and realize the simple truth: London in 1850 is a place where touch, taste, smell, and sound are all much, much louder. From somewhere behind you, bells ring half a dozen churches vying to outdo each other, or perhaps warning of a fire, another daily reality, since the city loves to burn, especially in the neighborhoods where people cram too many candles onto too little space. You pass a carriage emblazoned hackney coach and watch mouth agape as a family of 8 tries to pile out from the back. One child seems to have acquired a pigeon mid-journey, who, like you, looks a bit shell-shocked. As you wonder if you'd even fit in a Victorian carriage, a sudden walrus-mustached man almost knocks you into the gutter, apologizing over his shoulder with "mind the dip." You quickly discover that the dip isn't just a quirky turn of phrase. It's a literal trough cut into the sides of streets, where rainwater and everything else runs freely. Cross one without looking, and you're likely getting a full immersion experience. You move along, trying to blend in, but your accent's a dead giveaway the first time you say "excuse me." A nearby merchant gives you a look that borders on pity, and then offers you a fresh roll that, by modern standards, is almost certainly older than your favorite pair of socks. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Londoners of the era sometimes ate bread deliberately bulked up with chalk or bone dust to save on flour, and trust me, your stomach will notice. It's one more reason you're starting out at a disadvantage. Desperate for a moment of respite, you're drawn to a bustling square. children kick a rag-stuffed ball, to men loudly debate the sincerity of Charles Dickens' latest weepy novel. Overhead, a billboard proclaims the world's largest flea circus is only a penny a peek. You wonder if you'd actually survive as an actor, a modern marvel who bathes every day. Your only guide is the pounding in your chest and the knowledge that, unlike everyone else here, you have exactly zero experience with London's relentless, improvised choreography. There are stories here hidden in every brick and clattering hoof, but all you really want, for now, is a decent pair of shoes, a clean set of lungs, and a friendly face. Little do you know, those might be harder to find than a hot shower which, spoiler, the Victorians aren't exactly known for. As the city narrows around you, half dazzling, half dangerous, you realize it's only been minutes, and already you're starting to regret not choosing an era where Wi-Fi, at the very least, is a thing. The moment you try to take a proper breath in Victorian London, your lungs revolt. The air isn't just heavy, it's practically chewable, like someone's brewed up a soup with coal dust, factory smoke, and a pinch of mystery ingredient that makes your eyes water. Welcome to the era of the pea zooper, where fog is so thick that even streetlights barely manage a glow, and you genuinely worrying about accidentally walking into a wall, a horse, or something far less pleasant. Pea zoopers, the city's infamous toxic fogs, aren't the gentle morning mist you might be picturing. Instead, this is industrial strength stuff, dense with soot and sulfur from the thousands of coal fires burning in every home and factory. Historians still argue whether the worst winter fogs were deadlier in the city's east or west, but everyone agrees on one thing: breathing here is a full-body hazard. Your nose tingles, your eyes sting, and you're suddenly grateful for every throat lozenge and allergy pill you've ever taken in your own time. You try breathing through your scarf, except, whoops, scarves aren't a trendy accessory yet, and your scratchy Victorian cravat is more for status than sanitary self-care. There's no hiding from the fact that many Londoners, especially the poor, spend their lives inhaling this sooty stew. The air inside isn't much better, either. If you duck into a crowded tavern for a break, you face clouds of pipe smoke and the lingering stench of whatever happened there last night. The one upside: it's so dark and foggy that hardly anyone notices if your new boots are, in fact, covered in questionable substances. Navigating the streets in a pea zooper is a whole new game. Visibility drops to practically nothing. Carriages crawl, coachmen peer anxiously ahead, and you hear the slow clang of a bell from a constable stumbling along the curb. His job is literally to keep people from falling into the Thames by accident. Not that he's always successful. Every so often, you hear a panic splash that suggests someone didn't see the river until it was, well, too late. You shuffle forward, wary of every step, and soon you're elbow to elbow with strangers who look just as lost as you, except they're used to this. No one seems particularly bothered by the soup-thick atmosphere, and you see several street vendors hawking their wares as if nothing's wrong: roasted chestnuts, newspapers, and, for the very brave, mysterious eels writhing in open cisterns. The Victorians may have invented many things, but a sensible attitude to air quality was not one of them. Fun fact: some believed that smelling the distinctive London fog would toughen you up over time. Modern doctors would disagree, but a few Victorian doctors even insisted fog had purifying properties, a theory you're unconvinced by as you hack up a little more of the 19th century with each breath. If you look up, you'll notice that grand, glittering gas lamps, first introduced in the early 1800s, do little to cut through the gloom. Instead, their flickering light only exaggerates the eerie shadows, and you catch glimpses of hooded figures gliding along completely unseen until the last second. If you're feeling dramatic, and who isn't, with this much mucus, you let yourself pretend you're a detective in one of those penny dreadfuls sold by the damp fistful on street corners. But the truth is, every street, main thoroughfare, or dark alley is equally treacherous in a real London fog. You pause at a corner, utterly lost and already developing the ghost of a cough that, in this city, could be the harbinger of a far nastier fate. A passing newspaper boy, covered head to foot in a layer of soot that's almost a uniform for his profession, shouts headlines about Queen Victoria's latest engagement, then vanishes in the mist, leaving only his echo behind. As you turn, you spot a strange sight, a man wearing a kind of beak-shaped mask. He's no time traveler, just a chimney sweep with a homemade respirator filled with camphor and herbs. Quirky and resourceful, maybe, but definitely not protective against the real dangers here. Historians are still hotly debating whether the Victorian city's fogs were more a symbol of progress, the dark side of booming industry, or just a miserable byproduct that kept doctors busier than ever. Some even link Sherlock Holmes' perpetual gloom to these real-life conditions. Either way, you can't help but feel you're breathing the past with every step. Tripping clumsily over the curb, you barely dodge a team of horses emerging ghost-like from the haze. For one petrifying second, you can't even tell if you're in the middle of the road or pressed against the wall. The drivers call out barely audible warnings, but the problem is, everyone's covering their mouth with whatever scrap of cloth they can find. So, you adapt fast. You start pea soup navigation, one hand outstretched, the other clutching your chest, like an overacted stage play. In this era, the phrase "seeing is believing" was probably invented by someone who didn't live in London. The sharp taste of sulphur lingers as you pass yet another coal cart rumbling by. The noise is muffled, oddly eerie among the fog, and for a moment, you hear only your own shuffling steps and the soft hiss of your breath. Light joke here. You can't decide if you're more likely to trip over a chimney sweep, get lost in an alley, or just dissolve into the mist and show up as a weird footnote in some local penny paper. By the time the sun sets, if you can even see where the sun is, you've learned the hard way that even simple breathing here is a survival skill. You're grateful for one thing. At least you can't fully see what's lurking at your feet yet. That particular horror awaits you just after the next corner. You probably think you know gross. Maybe you've seen a messy college apartment or dodged puddles on a city sidewalk after a rainstorm. But nothing quite prepares you for the relentless onslaught of grime, trash, and downright human muck that coats every inch of Victorian London. Around every corner and beneath every uneven cobblestone, a patchwork of refuse so persistent and legendary, people in your own time would not so secretly be grateful for the invention of garbage trucks and plumbing. Your first mistake is trying to find a safe place to stand. Good luck. The gutters here, those dips you narrowly avoided earlier, are rivers of filth. It's not just rainwater, but a never-ending cocktail of spoiled food, animal droppings, the occasional discarded boot, and more than one knee-high slick that you'd rather not analyze too closely. And let's just say, if you ever thought the Thames would be a charming place for a riverside picnic, one whiff of its tangy, sewage-laden aroma snaps you back to reality. Historians still argue whether or not the great stink of 1858, the summer when the Thames was so fetid that Parliament nearly evacuated, was London's true low point, or just another Tuesday. Now, you can't be blamed for hesitating as you step gingerly past a particularly large, lumpy pile that looks suspiciously active. You lean closer, only to realize it's wriggling with a colony of rats feasting on what remains of someone's last meal. Victorian street rats are not shy. In fact, rat catchers often scrappy children with more bravery than you make a bit of pocket change, selling their live catches to local pubs for rat baiting competitions. Quirky. Absolutely. Humane. Let's not even go there. You almost want to salute each small hero, but for now, you just keep moving before one mistakes your shoe for the next upload to its personal high score list. Next up are the heaps of everyday trash. People here don't just toss things in a bin and wheel them out for Tuesday pickup. There are dustmen, a ragtag fleet of men and boys who cart away cinders, broken crockery, stale bread, and lumps of coal ash, but only if you can pay them, and only when they feel like it. The rest, it festers on walkways or, sometimes, is just lobbed straight into the nearest waterway. On a slow day, you might catch the sight of a mudlark, an enterprising soul, often a child, who scavenges through the river mud for scraps of rope or a bit of unclaimed coal. Some found fortune, a rare coin here, a lost boot there, but mostly they found frostbite or worse. As if the trash weren't enough, here's where Victorian sanitation gets extra personal. Indoor plumbing is a glimmer in the city's wealthy neighbourhoods. For the average Londoner, it's chamber pots and public privies if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's the convenience of tossing waste out the window, hopefully with a shouted "Gardiloo" as warning. More than one unlucky walker, historians suggest, was baptized by the airborne contents of a neighbour's chamber pot. There's a scholarly debate about just how strict the rules were. Some records hint authorities tried to enforce waste regulations, but the city's reality was plenty of "when the moon is high and the constables distracted, out it goes." It makes you rethink the idea of stopping under a window to tie your boots. Let's just say, everywhere you look, there are reminders that cleanliness here is aspirational. You pass a tangle-haired rag and bone man, his cart piled precariously high with bones, rags, and the odd dead cat. His routine is collecting and recycling the city's refuse, though you can only imagine what tomorrow's children will think of today's recycling obsession. Quirky tidbit: the city's soap was so expensive and poorly made that many Londoners only wash their faces, leaving the rest to air out. And if you thought your 3-day-old gym socks were potent, wait till you catch the summer breeze here. The jumble of odours and sights assails you from every direction. Market stalls reek of overripe fish, alleys ooze a slurry of rain and refuse, and the ever-present hum of flies fills the air so thickly it feels like a living, moving cloud. Just for fun, you spot a child with a hoop, only this one isn't wooden, but fashioned from what was once the rim of a broken chamber pot. Necessity breeds resourcefulness, if not always hygiene. Sometimes you try to steady yourself on a wall, only to find it's as sticky and grimy as the street. The dog residue coats your palm, and you can't help but wipe it on your already soiled trousers. Suddenly, the memory of antibacterial hand gel feels less like a convenience and more like futuristic magic. And it's not just physical filth. London's infamous dust heaps dot the landscape, literal mountains of ash and cinders that form their own grim skyline. Dickens himself memorialized these heaps in his stories, though even he was accused of exaggeration. Historians continue to squabble over whether the worst piles were actually as vast as claimed, or simply became literary legend with each retelling. Honestly, you start to play a personal game. How many steps till something disgusting can you take before disaster strikes? Spoiler: you rarely get to double digits. Muddy, exhausted, and desperately wishing for a basic trash can, you realize why a bright pasture is rare here. Everyone's head is permanently ducked, eyes scanning for the next pitfall or airborne hazard. You want to laugh, but you only manage a sigh, careful not to inhale too deeply. And with that, you keep trudging, a little warier, a little filthier, but already wiser to the city's nastiest realities. Welcome to London's ground level. Watch your step literally if you plan to make it to lunchtime alive. You're tired, filthy, and desperate for a drink, maybe even something as basic as a cold glass of water. But here's the Everest you didn't expect. Finding safe water in Victorian London is an exercise in pure, high-stress roulette. You wear well, a public pump, maybe a tempting mug from one of the food stalls, but quickly remember the endless warnings in modern times about boil before drinking when travelling. That advice started somewhere, and shockingly, this is one of the places that made it famous. Most Londoners get their water from the Thames or shallow wells, both of which are about as clean as the bottom of the communal privy narrowly dodged earlier. Some neighbourhoods do have water pipes, but only the richer homes enjoy anything like a proper supply, and even then, pipes run right alongside the sewers. Sometimes they're made from wood or lead, which seems safer only if you genuinely enjoy collecting heavy metals in your internal organs. Every glass of water is a gamble. You raise a cup, then hesitate. What looks refreshingly clear is often teeming with invisible life, bacteria, parasites, the works. The most infamous of these, of course, is Vibrio cholera. Yes, cholera which, when the Blue Death strikes the city, claims lives by the dozens every day. You see, the cause of cholera wasn't fully understood in your current historical moment. Most folks blame it on bad air or miasma, not realizing that the culprit is actually floating around in their drinking glass, doing the backstroke, while you stare thirstily at your reflection. Historians still argue whether the famous Broad Street pump cholera outbreak really changed public health forever, or if it took another few decades of tragedy before anyone took clean water seriously. You look for alternatives, beer and gin, popular choices, but certainly not every bar is trustworthy. The gin palaces here sometimes serve stuff more dangerous than the water, including homemade batches with a dash of turpentine to keep you lively. Tea and coffee aren't bad, because at least the water is boiled, but unless you've suddenly become wealthy or cunning, paying for hot drinks all day is unrealistic. The average labourer earns enough to keep themselves afloat, not to indulge in luxury beverages, just to survive the public health crisis. A quirky tidbit for you. Some entrepreneurial Victorians try to sell pure water from barrels on street corners. These vendors aren't exactly regulated, and the water often comes from a marginally less filthy stretch of river. It's the historical version of selling overpriced bottled water, except with more chance of digestive adventures and less guarantee of a tamper-proof cap. As you continue through the maze of street vendors and water sellers, you spot one of the city's rare public drinking fountains. It's gleaming, seemingly clean, and for a split second, you're tempted. Did you know the first commemorative London public drinking fountain wasn't built until 1859, a desperate answer 2 years of lethal epidemics? Even then, many Londoners remain too frightened or too proud to give up their beloved pint for the new temperance water movement. Historians hotly debate how much these fountains improved real lives, or whether folks just felt shamed into using them on Sundays, then promptly switched back to beer on Monday. Meanwhile, those unlucky enough to live in the rookery slums don't even have this much hope. Children carry battered jugs along treacherous, slippery alleys, returning with water so murky you'd never dream of touching it back home. No fancy home water filters here, just cloth strainers, faith, an immunity you most definitely don't have. You have little choice but to take a timid sip from an offered glass, trying not to think about what's swirling invisibly beneath the surface. It tastes like, well, not much, but then comes a weird aftertaste, the tin of the cup, maybe, or the ghost of the previous user's dinner. You shudder, promising yourself you'll stick to coffee if you make it through this alive. Suddenly, you spot an open sewer grill just in time to see a dog nudge a paper parcel into the sluggish flow below. Here's another oddity. Many streets still rely on the night soilmen, nocturnal labourers who clear out cesspools for a fee. They're gritty, respected in a strange way, and always paid in cash. Nobody wants an IOU from a night soilman. But most homes simply push their waste into the street. There's ongoing debate among scholars about whether these men were heroes of sanitation or just another piece of London's unsolvable public health puzzle. Your mouth is dry, but you're loath to risk another cup. You start to develop a finely honed water sixth sense. A sniff first, glance at the source, check for telltale floating creatures, then decide if you're brave or just desperately parched. Modern worries about microplastics feel almost laughable out of your current predicament. If you survive the morning without an urgent sprint to the nearest alley, it's a miracle befitting Dickens himself. You finally spot a weathered sign advertising imported spring water, only 2p. It draws a small crowd with its glowing promises. As you edge closer, you realize the seller is filling jugs from a covered cistern that smells suspiciously herbaceous. Or maybe that's just a hint of whatever market stall is next door. You grit your teeth, your tongue dry as a dust heap. Welcome to another impossible Victorian choice: thirst, risk, or wallet. No easy option, and nowhere to hide except in the next, slightly less dangerous adventure. Your stomach rumbles loudly enough that a passing mongrel gives you a look and one scrawny street urchin whistles in solidarity. Hunger in Victorian London isn't just a passing sensation. It's a full-contact sport with rules that change every block. Fresh fruit gleams temptingly on vendor carts, but you recall a dozen warnings about untouched foods in your own time, and here, you'd be wise to take them to heart. Browsing the city's chaotic markets in search of something safe, affordable, and filling is a challenge that would stump even the craftiest foodie you know. You pause at a bustling market square, bottomless baskets of cabbages, potatoes, and knobbly carrots competing for space beside glistening, if slightly grey, fish. The air is thick with the sour perfume of fermenting apples, sweat, and inevitably the sharp, raw aroma of freshly butchered meat. You quickly realize you're shopping blind. Nothing is wrapped, everything is handled freely, and the proudest sign is fresh today, which, in practice, means it probably hasn't walked away on its own, yet. Street food is everywhere, and some of the city's iconic snacks tempt your modern curiosity. Paizu's mysterious fillings, usually a savory mystery of dubious origins, wrapped in flaky, slightly greasy pastry. Eel stands are especially popular near the docks, doing a roaring trade in jellied eel, a local staple that's both nutritious and, depending on your adventurous palate, vaguely alarming. You're halfway through contemplating a wriggly, glistening slab when a vendor calls out a cheerful, "Best we've got." Still moving, see, that's one way to prove it's fresh. Quirky tidbit, the Victorians love their pickled walnuts almost as much as their eels, so you might spot those dark, shriveled orbs for sale too. But don't think you can simply grab a snack and stroll away. Money rules all here. Prices fluctuate by the hour, and bargains are mostly saved for locals with practiced bartering skills. Yesterday's bread, rock hard and dry, sells at a discount, but the difference in price is barely noticeable if your wallet is thin. Historians still argue whether market regulations or price gouging did more harm to the working poor, but for the outsider, that's you. It's a minefield of negotiation and the ever-present risk of being flat-out swindled. And if you are hoping for fruit, remember that unwashed apples could harbor more than just a worm or two. A roundabout way, the city bolsters your immune system if you survive. Next, you try your luck at a soup stall. The attendant ladles something dubious into a stoneware cup, the ever-popular pea and ham soup. Mostly pea, a little ham, and a sizable helping of flavor from the bottom of the barrel. As you sip, you realize the smoky taste is less smoked bacon and more yesterday's fire, but it's warm and, most importantly, it won't empty your pockets. But here's an open scholarly debate. Some claim these vendor soups were a lifeline for the poor and kept thousands going during harsh winters, while others insist that foodborne illness began its career as a serial Londoner, thanks to dubious street cooking. Either way, consider yourself lucky not to have an immediate reaction. For a fleeting moment, you crave a simple sandwich, something familiar and low risk. You scan for a bakery and finally spot a small sign wedged between apothecary ads, where fresh rolls promise half-penny buns. You discover, with mild horror, that fresh sometimes means the rolls have been creatively refreshed with a spritz and a rub. As you take a tentative bite, you notice an odd crunch. Is that bone dust? Yes. Another Victorian trick, stretching flour by bulking up bread with chalk or even ground bones. Health-conscious foodies of the future, eat your hearts out. Just as you're beginning to despair, you see rich aromas drifting from a roast chestnut cart. The vendor tosses you a reassuring "I hope" smile and hands over a paper cone. The heat seeps into your numb fingers as you crack the steaming shell, releasing a real, honest-to-goodness roasted flavor that makes you sigh with sleepy relief. Chestnuts were the fast food of the street corner set, sold warm in the winter fog, and you imagine munching these as you hurry toward the next danger, a moment of peace in the chaos. But food remains a privilege. Children line the alleyways, clutching scraps, their faces thin and hungry. You notice soup kitchens often run by churches offering the only solid meal someone will see all day. There's something comforting about the rhythm. Wait in line. Accept a humble bowl. Nod in gratitude. No one seems to think this charity will solve anything, but it keeps them moving for another day. You finish what little you dare to eat, pondering your luck. The search for food here is exhausting, risky, and nothing as simple as you know it. Every mouthful comes with its own gamble. You can try modern trick smell, poke, and a polite sniff, but nothing can mask the city's relentless uncertainty. One small solace: if the street food doesn't get you, there's always the next questionable culinary adventure. After all, you've survived Victorian lunch hour barely. If you thought pulling on a pair of joggers or soft pajamas at the end of a long day was tough, just wait until you try squeezing yourself into Victorian clothes. You reach for the familiar, but of course, nothing in your 21st century closet fits. It's all heavy wool, rigid stays, and starched cotton here. If you're a woman, a complicated ritual ensues: petticoats, underskirts, drawers, corset, good luck breathing, more skirts, a bodice, perhaps a crinoline hoop, and then the overdress. Oh, and don't forget about the bone-crunching boots. If you're a man, rejoice, you only have to deal with countless shirt layers, a waistcoat, suspenders, knee-scraping trousers, stiff collars, and an ever-present hat. Hats are basically Victorian passwords. No hat, no credibility. By the time you finally manage to assemble your Victorian outfit, no mirrors. By the way, you're probably sweating through all those layers. How did anyone survive summer? You mutter, trying to decide if you'd rather pass out from heat stroke or embarrassment. Your skin itches non-stop. Victorian wool, notorious for being just as comfortable as a burlap sack filled with nettles. Historians still argue whether undergarments were actually washed often or simply aired out. But either way, you really don't want to ask. There is a persistent, slightly sweet, slightly sour scent lingering like a sad cloud wherever you go. It's not perfume. It's just people. Mainstream fact. Fashion dictated not comfort, but class, and prevented anyone from moving freely. Wealthy women's dresses could weigh 10 or even 20 pounds. Diplomats' morning coats look sharp in sepia-tone photos, but when you're running, they'll trip you up faster than a banana peel in a cartoon. For the working class, a single change of clothes is a luxury. Many labourers sleep, work, and eat in the same grimy set for weeks straight. Here's a fringe tidbit. Victorian gentlemen wore detachable collars and cuffs, so they could appear put together without washing the whole shirt. Just snap on a fresh collar and voila, you're fooling nobody. Laundry, when it happened, was often done with caustic lye or left to chalky rainwater, so don't count on either the smell or feel improving as the day or week goes on. Oh, and beware arsenic green dye in your dress. Yes, it was gorgeous, but it could rot your skin and, some whisper, even poison you by touch. Fashion was literally, no pun intended, a killer. You head out hobbling, adjusting your tight collar, already missing the comforting swoosh of polyester. Every step squelches, thanks to the rain-soaked, mud-caked leather boots, slurping up every gross thing you just tried to avoid in the previous sections. You try fanning yourself discreetly, but everyone's used to sweating. Victorian perspiration is basically the soundtrack of the city, right next to clopping horses and cursing cabbies. If you thought you could blend in, think again. Locals instantly spot you, to clean, to pink, to modern looking even under all the wool. Your movements look awkward. Try carrying a pasture dictated by tight corset bones and 5 layers of skirt. The city's pickpockets see you as a delicious, well-dressed mark. They love day-old trousers nearly as much as they love wide-eyed out-of-towners. Even standing still attracts attention from street hawkers eager to pitch you some miracle cleaning solution, which is probably just more lie. You try to sit and catch your breath on a bench. Oops, Victorian benches have sharp, cold iron edges that jab into your overstuffed hips and poke at your tailbone. The seat never dries, always catching a trickle of yesterday's rain, and your skirts, petticoats, or trousers quickly soak through. Good news, though, no one expects comfort. Victorian living is all about being presentable, not cozy. On the contrary, visible discomfort and fainting were almost fashionable among the upper crust. Swooning in public, just another Tuesday for a tightly cinched young lady. You envy the street urchins darting by in shapeless, threadbare tunics. Their clothes are rags, sure, but at least they aren't being squashed. Pickpockets, sure, but at least their pants fit. You remind yourself that, according to dubious etiquette manuals, a lady is never seen running, and with all these skirts, that's a mercy, because you certainly can't. Frustrated, you hunt for anywhere warm, a public house, perhaps, or a coffee stall. But the Victorian era has no central heating, and every inch seems drafty, smoky, shivery, or too hot from coal fires. The extra layers become a sweaty curse. Wind blasts up through the floorboards and down through the chimney, chilling your clammy feet and sweeping up every strange and ancient odor the city can generate. You start to wonder if it's actually possible to suffocate just from trying to be respectable. Historians still argue whether the Victorians secretly hated these fashions as much as you do, or embraced the misery as a mark of pious self-discipline. Either way, you're learning every hour that what they call dressing with dignity would put any modern comfort seeker out of commission instantly. If you see anyone moving quickly, you can bet they're not nobility, or maybe they're fleeing a fire started by someone's dangerously flammable skirts. Yes, one spark, and you're a human torch. Victorian progress at its finest. Trying to peel off a jacket outside, you find nowhere safe to stash it without risking theft, water damage, or invasion by lice, one of London's most reliable companions. If you're lucky, a friend fumbles at your corset laces for a breathing break. If not, hope you like shallow breaths. Your feet, meanwhile, develop sudden sympathy for all those prodding, overworked carriage horses. Blisters are inevitable, and good luck finding a tube of ointment or even a pair of dry socks. You shiver, sweat, itch, and trip along the cobbles, cursing every moment you aren't blissfully pajama-clad in your own century. Meanwhile, through all the discomfort, life swirls past you, Victorian citizens bustling by, not missing a step, as if they're completely acclimated to their own itchy, hazardous uniforms. Perhaps they are, or maybe they just learned to hide it better than you ever could. Either way, the day seems longer, colder, and somehow even more impossible. A chill wind curls along the street, winding icily through your borrowed clothes as you pause, breath clouding, at the edge of another crowded square. Your throat aches, maybe from the air, maybe from shouting at the costermonger who tried to sell you an apple already nibbled by something with excellent teeth. But then, almost everyone seems to be coughing. In fact, for a city so bustling, there's an undertone of wheezes, sniffles, and dry hacks that you can't help but notice. You realize with growing discomfort that almost everyone in Victorian London, regardless of age or station, is perpetually sick with something. You clamp your lips shut, as if that could shield you from the tidal wave of germs pulling at you from every side. Welcome to the age of outrageous Victorian illness. If you're feeling brave, take a deep breath. Just know that statistically, you've probably already just inhaled 1,000 unidentified pathogens. This is a world without hand sanitizer, no vaccines for almost everything, and medicines that are more likely to make you worse than better. Mainstream historical fact time. Tuberculosis is the notorious White Death here, claiming thousands of lives every year. The distinctive, gut-wrenching cough of the consumptive is part of the city's daily soundtrack, so familiar that it weaves through the alleys like a tragic melody. It's so common people start to believe it's almost romantic, a sign of sensitivity. Even beauty, historians still argue whether the Victorians truly romanticized disease or just didn't know what else to do about it. And as if tuberculosis weren't enough, there's smallpox, scarlet fever, typhoid, measles, and this is just the greatest hits. Each ailment comes uninvited, sometimes all at once, and the average life expectancy is dismally low, usually around 40 years, and much, much lower for the poor. You reach up, unconsciously touching your arm where your 21st century vaccine scars would be, except here, you're freshly vulnerable. Smallpox vaccines are only just rolling out, and they're not even mandatory unless the authorities catch you, and being caught for vaccination, not exactly a badge of honor. Plus, here's a quirky tidbit. Before proper vaccinations, some Londoners actually tried variolation, purposefully scratching diseased matter into the skin to train the body. Science, or just a recipe for disaster? Historians squabble about how effective it actually was. Your brain aches with dread as you sidestep a hunched mother, gently rocking her feverish baby. Every fourth building seems to display a black crepe ribbon or a crude painted sign warning of fever inside. When you try to duck into a chemist's for refuge, the overpowering scent of camphor and sweet oil turns your stomach. The remedies offered are ridiculous: a bottle of laudanum for any complaint, magic plasters that promise to draw out evil humors, and cough drops made with morphine. There is no doctor's note or prescription needed. Anyone can wander in and buy a bottle potent enough to hold your symptoms and, yes, possibly your breathing. You eavesdrop on a conversation between an elderly maid and her mistress as they argue about whether inhaling smoke from burnt herbs will actually keep illness at bay. Historians still argue whether Victorian households truly believed in such homegrown medical theatrics, or if it was just a desperate last resort. One local even swears by the power of wearing a chunk of camphor tied around the neck as a charm against bad air. As you pass by, you spot someone sniffing a handkerchief soaked in vinegar, convinced it'll purify the city's swirling pestilence. You want to laugh, but behind the bravado, you see the whirring, knowing that the next fever could take anyone. Suddenly, a group of street children scurry by, their faces marked with pox scars, noses running. They sing a twisted rhyme about the fever man, and you realize how much disease pervades their lives. You cough nervously, immediately paranoid. Did you just catch something from the air we all share? If a Victorian child can fall ill and never recover, what hope do you, a modern, slightly hypochondriac visitor, really have? Even a simple scratch, say, from a stray cat whose territory you accidentally invade could spell disaster. There are no antibiotics here, just bottles labeled elixir, salve, or, alarmingly, animal spirits. One shopkeeper, beaming, tries to sell you a tonic derived from extract of beef, which is basically unseasoned, meat-flavored jello that's supposed to heal everything from heartbreak to chickenpox. Historians still argue whether beef D ever cured anything other than extreme boredom. You dodge a man hawking bottles of colored water, promising his latest cure will keep you safe from spring fevers. Almost every sickness, you learn, is both a source of fear and a business opportunity. The truly unlucky end up in the city's nightmarish hospitals. The famous great hospitals are more like holding pens for the desperate, often unwashed, and sometimes just unlucky. Nurses bark orders, force feed gruel, and if you're especially unlucky, might attempt bloodletting. Yes, still a thing. Chronically unwell, many Londoners never see a proper doctor, relying on dubious folk remedies, the wisdom of their grandmother, or simply waiting out the illness. You, perhaps already feverish, realize that in a world before antibiotics or modern hygiene, everything from a cut finger to a winter cough might be the end of you. So you clutch your own thankfully vaccinated arms a little tighter, dodging sneezes, superstitions, and hearty offers of hot gin for your blood. You notice that every day in Victorian London is a battle, not just with poverty and pollution, but against a hidden horde of microscopic enemies. You're not just out of your depth, you're outmatched. By nightfall, you're already developing a list of symptoms. The energy of Victorian London's labyrinth in neighbourhoods pulls you deeper, ushering you into one of the city's notorious rookeries. Impossibly dense slums famous for producing pickpockets at a faster rate than you lose loose change on public transportation. You try to walk confidently, but the farther you wander off the main thoroughfares, the narrower, muddier, and darker things get. The sunlight, already mucky with coal smoke, barely squeezes between broken, leaning buildings patched up with whatever their residents could find: crates, rags, even the odd street sign. The sense you have stumbled into another world, one both vibrant and threatening, only grows stronger. Children's laughter echoes from around a corner high, sharp, and not entirely friendly. You try to convince yourself the old tales of child gangs armed with quick hands and quicker feet are exaggerated, until you catch sight of three urchins sizing you up like you're the world's most interesting coin purse. You clutch your valuables tighter, but here's a fun historical fact. Thieves in Victorian London didn't just rely on speed. Many worked in complex networks, or schools, stealing and passing items between one another before you even noticed. By the time your hand reaches your pocket, your favorite trinket might have already found its way halfway down the lane. Shifting your stance, desperate to look less like a mark and more like a local, you try to walk with purpose. A street vendor peddles roasted chestnuts, his eyes never straying far from your pockets. A sharp-nosed girl offers to shine your boots for a halfpenny. You try to decline politely, but she's persistent, relentless, and you get the feeling her hands are as skilled at lightening a load as they are at polishing. Across the street, a grown man watches you, arms crossed, eyebrow cocked, a silent warning that this is his turf, and you're an unwanted guest. Deep in the rookery, you catch the whispers, some full of slang so thick, you're certain even most Brits would need subtitles. You catch fragments, dodge the flashlights, don't mind the nippers, and, your personal favourite, wouldn't last a day with them fancy boots. You'd laugh, but honestly, they're probably right. Historians still argue whether these criminal networks were more organised than law enforcement realised, or just loose bands of desperate individuals using street smarts to eke out survival in a relentless world. One quirky tidbit: in this world, even the animals can be recruited for crime. There's actual, if rarely enforced, precedent of magpies and trained dogs helping snatch purses or distract victims. So, if you spot a suspicious pigeon eyeing your bread roll, don't underestimate it. Keep that snack close. You keep moving, careful to avoid eye contact with clumps of teenagers wearing jackets a little too large and looks a little too hungry. Above your head, laundry lines droop with mismatched rags and, more than once, you see a face in the window, curious, judgmental, and then gone. At ground level, street-level agencies, known as fences, do brisk business from battered doors, buy stolen handkerchiefs here, a slightly used hat there, a watch of questionable provenance, if you're feeling bold. The lines between honest work and crime blurrier than the River Thames itself. As you wander, you picture the well-known figure of Charles Dickens, dipping his pen into every corner of these very streets. If literature taught you anything, it's that one does not simply stroll through a Victorian rookery and emerge unscathed. In Oliver Twist, even the artful dodger worked as part of a mini-crime empire. The reality is less literary, grubbier, tougher, and with far fewer street urchins breaking into song. Your idea of dangerous neighbourhoods from home feels almost quaint compared to the air here, sharp, thrumming with opportunity and threat. Suddenly, a commotion. Someone darts past, yanking at your coat. You twist, spinning so fast you almost lose your balance and your boots. You manage to keep your footing, but at the expense of your comm. Behind you, a burst of giggles signals that this was, in fact, your initiation. You might have gotten lucky, but don't get cocky. Even the best travellers are usually lighter by a wallet or two before they reach the end of a block. Oddly enough, the city's crime isn't just chaos. Some streets are protected by local gangs or charismatic underbosses who promise not to rob those who pay them off. Historians still argue whether these arrangements made life safer or merely complicated. After all, paying protection means relying on a different set of rules entirely. One historian's community order is another's organized extortion, and you get the feeling your naivete could make you a very wealthy target. You duck into the shadow of a crumbling wall, only to realize you're now sharing the space with a toothless old man sporting a grin like a broken picket fence. Lost, are ya? He wheezes. You can't decide if he's planning to help, hinder, or just entertain himself watching you flounder. The answer, of course, is all three. To get out, You'll need street smarts, the kind you haven't had to use since you learned how to avoid the suspiciously sticky floor at the local movie theater. Here, you're learning quickly. Keep your hands deep in your newly threadbare pockets. Don't accept mysterious drinks. And if a stranger is being too helpful, check to make sure you've still got your shoes. By the time you finally stumble out into a broader, busier street, you're a little breathless, certainly lighter around the pockets, and absolutely convinced that Victorian London's thieves could teach modern pickpockets a thing or two. A bark of laughter erupts from a group nearby, and you almost join in. It's either that or start crying. But, after all, if you can make it through a Victorian rookery with only your dignity wounded, maybe, just maybe, you'll make it to sundown. As for the rest of your belongings, consider them a very small donation to the city's lively underground economy. You panic for a second because getting lost in Victorian London isn't just a matter of pulling out your phone, pinching a map, and finding your comforting blue GPS dot. Here, every street looks like every other: soot-streaked stone walls, crooked iron railings, shop fronts brimming with mismatched signs, and the ceaseless shuffle of hurrying feet. You hope you're heading towards something safe, but honestly, you could be walking into the notorious rookeries or, if your luck's especially poor, about to cross paths with someone who thinks your shoes look, well, just a little too clean. The labyrinthine nature of the city wears on you quickly. Streets double back. Alleyways squeeze to a single shoulder's width, and you feel, more than see, the wary eyes following from behind tattered curtains or broken windows. People vanish down passageways, and for a moment, you're convinced one side street is growing narrower and darker merely to spite you. The whole city feels half concealed, full of secrets, each one a potential danger for an out-of-towner who sticks out like a sore thumb. The idea of law and order is flexible at best. The Metropolitan Police, only a few decades old by now, patrol with their tall hats and stern faces, but their authority isn't always respected. The locals call them bobbies, and the opinions range from grudging acceptance to outright scorn. You've read the police were brought in to professionalize law enforcement, but historians still argue whether their presence has truly cleaned up the city or just shuffled the crime around to darker corners and more desperate times. For every bobby on the beat, there's a story of a bribe, a blind eye, or an accidental tumble into the Thames that never gets properly explained. You try your best to mind your own, though that's easier said than done. A frantic woman yells after a pickpocket who's long gone with her clutch. Two men argue over a sack of coal. One swears it's his, the other claims he found it fair and square. You duck your head, suddenly aware that your own pockets are extremely vulnerable. Perhaps you even reach, absent-mindedly, to check for your house keys, and there's nothing there but fuzz and a lump of Victorian lint. Congratulations, even imaginary house keys are out of reach tonight. That's when you stumble into a group of ragged boys. One grins a toothless grin and greets you in a thick local accent, the specifics of which are so mangled that you catch only every third word. He's friendly sort of until he realizes you're hopelessly, devastatingly lost. Mercifully, he reveals a quirky local service. For a halfpenny, show why anywhere you like, and for a penny, won't nick your boots. Child guides urchins, in pop culture speak, sometimes really did hustle newcomers across town, but no promises you'll arrive with all your belongings intact. Every caller offers a reminder that class and status matter. A well-dressed lady sweeps by under the glare of a footman, her parasol a miniature flag of privilege. If you try to pass yourself off as respectable, good luck. Victorian etiquette is a giant tangle of unspoken rules about where you can walk, who you can look at, and exactly how much of your ankle to display. Mess up, and at best you're ignored. At worst, you become a target. Meanwhile, the punishments for crime could be both harsh and weirdly inconsistent. Petty theft. Maybe a night in a holding cell that smells like boiled rats, which is, suspiciously, exactly how rat actually smells. Bigger offense. Public humiliation, forced labor, or if you're especially unlucky, a one-way ticket on a prison ship to Australia, a policy historians debate for both its severity and its, frankly, baffling logistics. You pass the looming bulk of Newgate Prison. The high walls exude menace, and you swear you hear not just the echo of chains, but perhaps a faint chorus of angry shouts and a single, despondent banjo. The city's tabloids, the penny dreadfuls, have made a whole industry out of lurid accounts of criminals, murderers, and mysterious unsolved crimes. Did Jack the Ripper's legend send shockwaves through every dark alley? Or do locals just like having something to gossip about? The debate rages on. With every step, you realize how tangled, how fraught, and how arbitrary justice feels here. Sometimes, being in the wrong place at the wrong time is all it takes to find yourself accused of a crime. Explain. Under laws you've never even heard of. For example, you could be arrested for simply standing about with no visible means of subsistence. Vagrancy wasn't just frowned upon. It was technically illegal. The ever-present fear, though, is not just the bobbies or the lurking cutpurse, it's also the city itself. Fires break out with alarming regularity. Gangs mark their territory with strange chalk marks, and a rumour flies up the street about a buried treasure under the pie shop Sodley, only ever resulting in more angry pie lovers and fewer pies. In certain districts after dusk, it's best to walk quickly and avoid eye contact, lest you become the subject of the next day's whispered cautionary tale. You consider asking someone for directions, maybe to the British Museum, just for a whiff of that high culture and clean, dry floors, but the risk feels too great. Instead, you keep moving, weaving between revelers tumbling out of gin palaces, and the ever-present calls of street vendors offering questionable remedies for every ailment. When an officer finally does approach, blue coat buttoned up to his chin, you half expect help, only to get a gruff warning. Don't loiter, keep moving, and for heaven's sake, watch the shadows. Victorian London's law and order isn't built to protect you. It's a patchwork, a gamble, a roulette wheel spun by social class and streetwise bravado. The deeper you get, the more it dawns on you you're not just a tourist here, you're potential prey. There's no easy way home, no safety in the mob, just an endless maze, and you, a new arrival, already on borrowed time. Historians still argue whether a stranger's best asset in this city was quick wit or dumb luck, but tonight, you'd happily trade both for just a little bit of sunlight, a trustworthy guide, and maybe, just maybe, a squadron of those time-traveling police boxes. The sky sags into night, but London absolutely refuses to settle down with you. You might have thought evening would offer a little breathing room, maybe a hush would fall. People would disappear behind their doors, and some version of peace would finally let you sleep. But, if anything, you're about to find that after dark, the city only grows rowdier, stranger, and a whole lot less forgiving to anyone fond of silence or soft sheets. Your body aches to many hours hunched and jostled, but the quest for a good night's sleep is just getting started. Leaning against a lamplit wall, you consider your options. The idea of curling up in the open is laughable. Between the teeming crowds, the steady nerves of passing police, and the filthy stones still slick from whatever was spilled earlier, you'd be lucky to get 5 minutes rest without someone stepping on your fingers or maybe mistaking you for a sack of potatoes. Victorians have absolutely no chill at bedtime. Sounds swirl around you with almost comedic persistence. Church bells clash on the hour, never quite agreeing which hour it is. Unseen horses snort and stamp, management of traffic by shouts and sharp cracks of the whip. From nearby pubs, a tangle of drunken singing and muffled weeping drifts into the road, where it is immediately challenged by newspaper sellers bellowing out headlines about mysterious fires or the latest marvel from the colonies. Not to be outdone, a man with a barrel organ cranks out something peppy and unintelligible, seamlessly woven through it all, as the barking of stray dogs, the squeaks of rats, and, at intervals, the plaintive wails of night workers hoping to catch a final client or two before the constable passes by. Good luck drifting off to that lullaby. Mainstream history fact incoming. Victorian Londoners had to survive nights far noisier than you probably imagine. There were over 10,000 street lamps by the mid-1800s, but this faint light only encouraged nightlife. Pubs were packed. Night soilmen began their shifts hauling out human waste, and factories ran shifts late into the night, their machinery pounding the evening air almost as relentlessly as your own heart. The city never actually slept, which might explain why so many paintings from the era depict people under heavy shadows, sporting bags under their eyes. But if you think you can just check into a snug little guest house or the nearest hotel, think again. For most Londoners, beds were a rare luxury. Many rented a doss house spot for a few pence to catch. Your bed was often an upright wooden bench, sometimes just a length of rope strung under the armpits, so you could sleep dangling like a muppet discarded onto a co-track. Quirky tidbit here. Rope beds actually existed. Poor workers would pay to snooze, hanging from a taut rope, then be woken at dawn with a sharp snap as the rope was untied. On the off chance you nab yourself a spot in a cheap lodging house, be prepared to share it with at least a dozen strangers, plus a population of fleas, lice, and that one guy who can somehow snore louder than the brewery carts rumbling past. Shivering under a blanket, desperately in need of a serious date with a washing tub, you doze in and out of awareness, always one loud shout or raucous laugh away from tumbling back into wakefulness. Just when your eyelids begin to droop, you're snapped awake by a keening whistle. You bolt upright if you haven't fallen right off your bed, heart hammering. It's just the night patrol alerting others to trouble. Maybe a fire has started, or a thief has leapt the fence with a stolen chicken. Unlike modern police sirens, a Victorian whistle is part signal, part warning, and completely terrifying at 2 a.m. Historians still argue whether the constant noise of the late Victorian city was more disruptive to mental health, or whether it actually helped London's people build thicker skins and rougher humour to cope. Some say the laughter of street sellers was an antidote to the clamour of daily hardship. Others insist that decades of bad sleep was behind some of the era's famously eccentric personalities. You try how you try to make your own peace with it. Flipping over, careful not to roll off onto the unswept floor, you stuff your jacket under your head, attempting to block out the conversations about last week's public hanging, the tap dancing mouse show, and whether or not Queen Victoria secretly sleeps upside down like a bat. You discover, to your deep dismay, that even your own snoring is not loud enough to drown out the cacophony outside. The darkness brings its own anxieties, too. Not everyone out after midnight is just looking for fun. If you're unlucky enough to wander the lamplit alleys, chances are you'll cross paths with desperate souls, pickpockets working one last purse, constables prowling for troublemakers, dock workers stumbling home, or street vendors hawking mysterious remedies for anything that ails you. Even the cats, it seems, have somewhere urgent and possibly criminal to be. Finally, you nestle into a position that's just uncomfortable enough to keep you awake, but slightly less torturous than standing upright. You can taste the coal smog leaking through the cracked window. The straw beneath your bench presses patterns into your skin. Who needs a memory foam mattress when you have memories of rope beds and sleepless struggle? A neighbor mumbles something in their sleep. You try not to listen, but you catch a fragment. Hope it don't rain. Not again. The building, always ready with its own slapstick comedy, lets loose a mighty creak, just in case you'd forgotten how old and leaky it was. Victorian architecture, built to last, but not necessarily for comfort. Approaching morning, you watch pale light slice through the window, illuminating clouds of dust and the occasional floating feather origin. Frankly, best left unexplored. Congratulations. You've survived a Victorian night, though your back feels suspiciously 17 years older, and you've got that lovely déjà vu of being the only one at the sleepover still awake. With the city rising to another cacophonous dawn, you can't help but laugh at yourself. Who knew missing your own bed and the gentle hum of your phone charger could feel so poignant? Only 5 more hours until your chance to try again, unless, of course, you're drafted by the night soil men to help with their glamorous pre-breakfast shift. There is no gentle way to break it to you. By the time the Victorian sun climbs to its smoky zenith, you're gagging for any kind of comfort or distraction, but instead, you stumble right into the harshest reality yet: child workers, grim-faced and impossibly adult, threading their way to jobs so dangerous and exhausting you can barely watch, let alone survive. The youngest looks 7, maybe 8 at a stretch, though you quickly realize many are smaller simply by growing up hungry. Even the city's respectable corners ring out with the sound of their hard-soled boots running late for shift changes. That so-called golden age of progress loved by history books. Well, for most of London's kids, it means work before dawn and bruises by breakfast. You make eye contact with a girl about your age, well, your age if you were born a century and a half ago and weathered like an old tree stump. She's carrying a heavy basket of coal through thinning fog, face streaked with soot, and she glares at your soft hands and foreign confusion. You'd help, except last time you tried to help, a rat catcher's boy accused you of stealing. Here, every child is already bristling with street smarts. Tiny boys dart in and out of horse-drawn traffic delivering messages for pennies, while girls as young as 8 serve in sweltering laundries, scalded pink by lie and endless boiling. Take a step inside a factory if you dare, and you can even get in past the foreman's whistle and sharp glare. The clang of machines is deafening. Lined up in a row are half-timers are kids who work 6-hour days after a morning of pennies worth education. Their job seems simple: pulling threads, watching spindles, dodging dangerous moving parts, but the consequences are brutally real. Fingers vanish, scalpings happen, and no one stops the machinery for a single screamed warning. Historians still argue whether the infamous pauper apprentices of Dickensian legend really suffered worse than others, but you're struck by the sheer number of lost shoes and makeshift bandages scattered about. There's a myth that magical pluck or a clever joke could win you favor, but the truth is grayer and less forgiving. Feeling faint from the heat and haze, you lurch back into the street, glad for air that, while tinged with smoke and sorrow, at least won't chew up your hands by lunchtime. You pass a chimney sweep, maybe 9 or 10, knees black and eyes shining, waving you off with a sing-song sweeps away. He's headed to squeeze into a flue barely wider than your shoulders. In Victorian London, the smaller you are, the more you're worth, and not in a way you want to be. Remember that pea soup fug you choked on earlier. Many children's lungs fill up with soot before they ever find out what it means to grow up. If you think you could just muddle along at your own pace, think again. Even on the gentler edges of city life, domestic service devours hundreds of thousands of young workers each year. Housemaids rise before anyone else, fetch water, haul coal under shrill bells, and then get the privilege of hand-washing endless sheets and linens, all for a few pence and a straw pallet in the attic. One mainstream fact: the 1861 British census found nearly 1 in 5 girls in domestic service by their teens. The only upside for you is the possibility of a second, meagre breakfast, but honestly, it's mostly cold porridge, a more peculiar job. How about mudlarking? Wading through the filth at low tide along the Thames, hoping to find a lost treasure or a half-worthless chunk of coal. Boys and girls alike squelch along the thick river mud, shrieking whenever they unearth something sharp, half of them trying to avoid being run down by the horses that all refuse away. You eye the swirling grey water and remember that, earlier, you couldn't bring yourself to drink even a single mouthful. For them, it's life or malnourished death. As you try and fail to keep step with this feverish pace, you wipe your brow and wish for a single minute of solitude. Forget it. The outdoor offices of Victorian labour ring all day with shouted orders and curses strong enough to make a sailor blush. You're lucky you haven't been pressed into pure finding, gathering dog mess for tanneries. Oddly, historians still debate how many of these odd jobs were assigned purely for poverty's sake versus attempts by reformers to teach discipline. Either way, you realize your resume isn't winning any prizes here. Pausing by a battered tenement doorway, You watch as a group of ragged urchins squabble over a game of knucklebones made from real animal bones, no plastic here. Just scavenged bits from last night's dinner. Someone nearby shouts the cry of a street lottery, and a few kids drop everything to try their luck for a single pence. If by now you're thinking you could make friends, guess again. You're twice as awkward and 3 times as slow. A quick attempt to share anything from your pocket spoiler. You have nothing useful if met with laughter and a hand shoved into your coat, looking for hidden coins. Street trust is a rare luxury, sold dear, tired, underfed, and deeply out of your league. You wander into an alley where a grim-faced boy nobly offers you a job as a crossing sweeper just in time for another round of rain and the city's finest animal droppings. Maybe you fancy yourself as the next Dickens hero, but even if you manage a quip, it falls flat on Victorian ears. Bright sides are hard to come by here, unless you count the makeshift skipping ropes or a rare smile when someone finds a whole crust of bread. As the afternoon slides toward a bleak evening, you're left with a nagging ache. In tossing and turning among a city's forgotten, you realize how stamina gets measured not in hours, but in how many days you can go without rest, food, or a real friend. Still think you could keep up, even for a single hour, if you thought that navigating the food, fashion, and fog was complicated. Just wait until you face the daily maze of Victorian beliefs and curious cures. Let's be honest, your modern instincts start tingling the moment you eye a shop window lined with glass jars of leeches, mysterious powders, and pamphlets advertising electrifying nerve cordials as recommended by doctors. There's something charming about a world so bustling with odd remedies, but tonight you're ducking superstitions left and right, hoping not to fall prey to a medical marvel gone wrong. You start with a cough, a simple one, from all that coal-filled air. A street vendor offers you a hard, black cough lozenge loaded with ingredients you don't recognize. You thank them and pocket it, but can't help Googling with your mind whether Spanish fly or opium tincture is involved. Spoiler: medicinal opium is an actual thing here. People around you truly believe disease travels through miasma, invisible bad air, and you overhear worried Londoners waving bunches of lavender near their noses or wearing little pomanders to ward off illness. Historians still argue whether public health campaigns of the era genuinely helped cut infection rates, or just helped people sleep a little easier at night. Feeling achy, you wander past an apothecary. The window is packed with advertisements for lotions promising to cure everything from falling sickness to heartbreak. Inside, you realize the doctor is a man in a frock coat with spectacularly bushy eyebrows and no medical degree. Instead, he spouts rapid-fire presumptions while recommending headaches be treated by cupping heating little glass globes and sticking them to your forehead until your skin balloons purple. You ask about aspirin, he offers willow bark. For fever, you'd get calomel, which suspiciously contains mercury. When he says, "It'll clear your humours," you contemplate running for the door. Neighbours swap horror stories. One woman swears her cousin vanished after a blistering with mustard plasters, while a nearby tailor claims he was bled by a barber for a stomachache, barely living to tell the tale. Victorian medicine straddles quackery and progress, only just beginning to accept that germs cause disease, not evil spirits or bad smells. Hospitals and workhouses are widely considered places of last resort. People fear going in, but are also terrified to stay out when illness strikes. For a touching example of daily superstition, you watch a mother scold her child for whistling inside bad luck, apparently could bring down the evil eye. You catch yourself instinctively avoiding ladders and offering silent apologies to the nearest black cat. Someone mumbles about fairy rings in the grass and refuses to walk across them. Not all quirks are harmless. Many Victorians still trust spiritualists to contact the dead, and seances complete with mysterious table rapping are in vogue in certain parlour circles. A local matron encourages you to slip an iron key under your pillow to ward off nightmares. "Better safe than sorry, dear," she says, hinting that sleep is risky business lately, with so much sickness afoot. She's not wrong. Cholera and diphtheria break out with terrifying regularity, and herbalists do a booming trade, blending cures from foxglove, arsenic, and even belladonna deadly nightshade. The irony, sometimes, the only actual benefit is a placebo effect, a word not yet in use here, or at least the comfort of feeling proactive. Fancier types are obsessed with phrenology, which claims you can diagnose a person's character by feeling the bumps on their skull, sort of like reading your zodiac sign for job interviews. To improve your odds, there's always the option of carrying a rabbit's foot, or in a pinch, just never changing your socks to avoid angering fate. Don't try Victorian shoes already reek. Sometimes, you realize, the line between science and superstition is foggy enough to make you wish you were back in the relative safety of your own era. Questionable energy drinks and all. Scholars debate whether folk customs, like turning your coat inside out to avoid fairies, genuinely persisted across all social classes, or if they were simply the domain of the desperate and bored. Either way, you notice old habits die hard as you accept a salt pinch over your left shoulder at dinner, and watch restful sleep evaporate when your neighbor relates the story of spring-heeled jack-a-leaping, fire-breathing villain said to haunt unsuspecting Londoners after nightfall. When you try to get help for your lingering cough, you're led to a small back alley where a wise woman doles out herbs and incantations in equal measure. Children gather for her honeyed licorice root, and she places a protective penny in your palm, warning you never to spend it lest your luck turn sour. For a moment, you think the scene almost comforting, but are quickly reminded, health here is mostly a matter of luck, faith, and whatever's cheapest at the nearest market. As you finally step away, clutching your bag of dubious powders, you're keenly aware of the paradox. London, home to the launch of groundbreaking science, is simultaneously entangled in some of the strangest beliefs and tangliest of old wives' tales. Medicine bottles jostle for space with amulets. Nightly prayers go hand in hand with ceremonial knocking spirit lights. Extra candles lit in memory of the recently departed. You realize, a bit reluctantly, that your odds of making it through even half a Victorian day with your limbs and spirit intact may hang on whether you remember a dozen arbitrary do's and don'ts, or just keep a healthy skepticism handy. Next time, maybe stick to a tin of cough drops and Google for home remedies, no leeches required. You glance around, nervously aware you're being sized up by more than just the vendors on the corners. Everywhere you turn, invisible social rules are as solid and confining as the stones under your feet. Victorian London is not simply a city. It's a web of hierarchies, where gender and class are inescapable cages, even for time travelers with, say, a very progressive idea of how the world ought to work. An upper-class lady sweeps past in a cloud of lavender water and scrutiny, the crowd parting before her umbrella like the Thames at low tide. You, on the other hand, are relegated to the gutters by your lack of credentials. Forget about opening any fancy doors without a proper introduction or at least a change of shirt. Your borrowed coat, already frayed, marks you as solidly lower class. People look over you, through you, not at you. Victorians, a curious mixture of politeness, suspicion, and rampant snobbery, use details like accent, manners, and even the shine of your boots to assess your worth within seconds. Historians still debate the degree to which social mobility was really possible outside the world of Dickens's fiction, but for the average soul, the barriers are everywhere. Let's say you're female in this experiment. Suddenly, there's almost no public space where you feel truly allowed. Women traveling alone are eyed with a mixture of pity if you're older or suspicion if you're young. Go into a coffee house. Prepare for a scandalized silence, unless you want to be confused with the wrong sort of woman. Even walking briskly marks you as questionable, since the exaggerated swish of heels is seen as brazen. Gentle sarcasm aside, it's a struggle just to exist with your 21st century expectations. Want to roll up your sleeves and join a trade? Sorry, most skilled professions are closed to you. Saucy comments about bloomers or everywhere knee muscles are apparently a threat to public decency. Being a man isn't exactly a picnic either. The pressure to provide, to project stoicism, and to never betray confusion or, heaven forbid, your utter horror at what passes for restrooms is enormous. Any sign of weakness, and you risk being mocked or overlooked. Boys are hustled toward apprenticeships as soon as they learn to count, expected to squeeze adult ambition into still growing shoes. Everywhere, rules engrave themselves invisibly: seats on omnibuses, the right to speak in certain gatherings, even where you're allowed to look. You might step aside too quickly for a passing lady of the quality, only to be nearly bowled over by a pack of boys sent on endless errands for tuppence a week. The class system is intricate. Titles, lineage, and family reputation matter far more than personal actions in the eyes of most locals. Sometimes, the smallest slights, like failing to tip a doorman or address someone as sir, could banish you from the polite world, which Victorians call society, with a capital and pronounced uppercase S. Doesn't matter if you got perfect grades or scored the winning goal back home. Here no one cares, unless you also come with a letter of introduction and, ideally, a crest. The idea of meritocracy is mostly a punchline reserved for fairy tales. This is a city where even public parks have areas forbidden to the lower orders, and social climbing is both a desperate hobby and a spectator sport. Quirky detail for you: upper-class ladies sometimes had calling cards, special printed slips, used for complex rituals of visits and introductions. If your card was bent in a certain corner, it broadcasted messages subtle enough to confuse Shakespeare. Ironically, even what you eat broadcasts your social DNA. A chunk of cold mutton, you're above the street, but below the nobility. Bread and tea, working class, exotic fruit. Practically a badge of aristocracy, especially if the oranges are fresh, not fuzzy. Turn up at the wrong meal, at the wrong hour, for example, trying to order dinner before 7 p.m., and you're swiftly marked as uncultured or, worse, laughably new. As for modern ideas, don't even think about championing human rights or upsetting the apple cart of Victorian customs. Speak to boldly regarding women's suffrage, protest the exploitation of child labor, or suggest that everyone, irrespective of gender, deserves a seat at the table, and you risk being written off as dangerously odd. Even believing that women could be doctors sparks endless debate, and, factually, the first female British physician, Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, had to fight extraordinary odds just to practice medicine at all. Historians still argue whether Victorian attitudes delayed progress more than we realize. How far ahead could society have been if so many brains, barred by gender or class, had been put to use? Ultimately, you're fenced in by invisible rules, tiptoeing through a conversational obstacle course, striving not to offend. It's not just about survival now. It's about stifling your personality, learning to curb modern impulses to speak out, move freely, or question authority unless you enjoy being labeled unhinged. Even laughter has a prescribed volume here, so if your giggles too hearty, expect some stiff glares. Oddly enough, sometimes the harshest judgments come from your own social equals. If you let slip that you don't know the right way to lace boots, or fail to navigate the complicated etiquette of introductions, it's almost as if you've broken some cosmic London rule. And don't even get started about crossing professional boundaries. The mere whiff of social climbing is enough to ignite round-the-corner gossip for weeks. As you try to figure out who you even are in this place, girl, boy, rich, poor, or somewhere inconveniently in the middle, you grasp a simple reality. Even if you physically survived Victorian London, the constant squeezing pressure of its gender and class cages would be enough to wear most modern visitors thin. Maybe in a future bedtime story, we'll let you be the eccentric Victorian who changes everything. But tonight, best not to get too radical, at least if you want to make it to breakfast. There's a moment, a tiny, deliciously hopeful moment when you spot something that looks almost familiar. Your modern heart leaps. It's a sign outside a narrow shop window. Telegraphic office. Next door. Oil lamp globes glow in the shadow of a sign that claims water closets within. Is this it? Have you, by a miracle, stumbled upon the ancestors of modern conveniences, You decide to investigate and discover that cutting edge in the Victorian sense is, well, a bit of a stretch by 21st century standards. The first marvel you attempt is the penny in the slot public lavatory. You fumble with your coin, only to discover the contraption promptly or perhaps rudely locks itself on you, hinges creaking, before giving you a thin, exceedingly scratchy square of paper. Historians still argue whether these early toilets were more a sign of civilization or simply another source of comic misery for citygoers. But one thing's for certain, the experience does nothing for your dignity, and very little for your hygiene. Shaking off the ordeal, you set your sights on communication. The telegraphic office beckons. Tracing the complex, spaghetti-like wires that snake across the wall, you realize sending a message requires knowing Morse code or, more accurately, paying someone who knows. You're handed a scrap to write your message, which will be tapped out and sent, then transcribed and delivered by a boy who, judging by his torn coat and fixed scowl, is unlikely to break any land speed records. The message is a whole event, not the instant relief of a text. Quirky fact, one enterprising Londoner actually sent his dog's bark via telegraph, but unless you're feeling creative, the system's not much help if you want to update your group chat or ask your mom for a ride home. Onward to the next marvel, street lighting. You squint up at lamps that flicker, hiss, and occasionally explode, fueled by gas pipes that wheeze ominously whenever the wind picks up. In wealthier quarters, you might stumble upon an Edisonian bulb radiating a faint amber light. Still, most neighborhoods trust the ancient magic of whale oil lamps and candles, which means take note the shadows are long, and thievery comes as standard. It's why, even at dusk, you're advised to walk quickly, pockets tight and eyes wide. Historians still argue about how much gas lighting truly reduced street crime. Some say it merely gave bandits better visibility. A crowd near a storefront draws your attention as a new wonder is demonstrated. A stereoscope. The shopkeeper boasts that Queen Victoria herself adores the 3D images, though you're not sure her taste is the reliable kind. You peer through the lenses, marveling at a blurry parish street, before locking eyes with a soot-faced child, helping her mother hawk matches. It reminds you Victorian fun is a wild blend of wonder and strangeness. For extra laughs, a few upper-class families are even rumoured to host séance parties, using clumsy telegraphy to contact the spirit world. Whether these were more effective than today's Wi-Fi Ouija boards, scholars still hotly debate. Contemplating a bath, you learn that the rare household with actual plumbing can offer only an erratic trickle of water, sometimes heated in a copper below stairs, sometimes not at all. If your accommodations are less salubrious as they almost certainly would be, you might dash to the nearest public bathhouse, pray your towel isn't pilfered, and steel yourself for an audience. Privacy is not on the Victorian menu. Quirky fact, some bathhouses would rent you hot towels at an extra fee, assuming you survive the scalding water first. At a loss for how to kill time, you try your hand at the latest fad, the velocipede, a proto-bicycle with no pedals, no brakes, and the habit of toppling unsuspecting riders into heaps of manure. You give up halfway across the square, realizing that even Victorian innovations seem custom-built to humble foreign newcomers, especially those whose last ride was an e-scooter. Up above, a postman eyes you from his perch. The penny post is a proud British invention, but quirky detail letters arrive up to 12 times a day, sometimes carried by postboys younger than your average YouTuber's audience. Still, with torrents of letters, invitations, and advertisements pouring in, Victorians pioneering junk mail might be the one invention you'll gladly skip. In a final push to blend in, you attempt to operate a reliable timepiece, a clunky pocket watch that, frustratingly, runs 5 minutes fast or slow, depending on how recently you've been jostled by the crowds. The city's grand railway clocks boom out the hour with stentorian pride, but fun detail the Greenwich Mean Time you depend on is brand new, and not everyone agrees to follow it. You're left frowning at your watch, feeling both behind and ahead, trapped within TikToks that don't match up. Surrounded by modern marvels, you find you're still just as lost and possibly more so. So much for the idea that technology makes life easier. If history is progress, your brief tour of Victorian conveniences is a reassuring reminder. Sometimes, you really, truly don't want to go back in time after all. You're still standing in the sharp, grey morning light, eyes raw from smoke, hair whirled from the wind and grit. Every muscle aches, not from heroic exploits, but from too many hours trying very hard not to fall into a gutter, get sideswiped by a brewer's cart, or say the wrong word to the wrong constable. You want to believe you've toughened up since you staggered into this living, breathing labyrinth, but if you're honest, you weigh about as much as a sack of potatoes compared to the city's pounding realities. Hunger sits heavier than ever in your gut, and despite all you've survived, you're still just a tourist to catastrophe, alarmingly close to total collapse, and longing for the possibility of anything soft or serene. You glance longingly at the impossibly distant train station, ticket booths crowded by lines of restless travellers. A small part of you fantasizes about running for the next outbound train anywhere beyond these narrow, relentless streets. But most railway lines are for the city's wealthier set, and you'd barely make it past the ticket seller's steely gaze before being laughed out of the station or, worse, questioned by a suspicious railway bobby. Farewells aren't easily bought, and even if you could, there's nowhere in this era where you'd find a modern escape route, no charging cable, no rescue call, not so much as a vending machine. Instead, you're cornered by a small, hopeful crowd. Someone mistakes your accent for something posh and asks for a penny, while another laughs at your obvious discomfort and nudges his friend. See there, that's a proper toff, fresh off the continent. You have no real chance to fit in, not in the bustling, hungry markets, nor the shadowy alleys you now avoid as a matter of survival. The rhythm of the city isn't something you learn in a day. It's chiseled into boot leather and bronchial tubes over years of hard, endless living. Historians still argue whether urban survival in Victorian London hinged more on grit or on luck. Those born to the city seem to possess both a certain heedless immunity to bad water, mystery maladies, and back alley mischief. Modern visitors, without immunity, money, connections, or a local's cruel wit, would not likely last longer than a single, sleepless night. There's a certain poetic injustice about the whole experiment. For every rich detail you take in, there's some sharp edge waiting to draw blood. A woman brushes past, careful to mind her bonnet, and drops a coin. Was it on purpose? You don't know. You just stare as it rolls into the muck of the gutter, out of reach except for those who really need it. Nor would picking it up help you much now. With every chime of a distant church bell, the city pulses on, barely noticing your struggle perhaps, as scholars debate, exactly as it always did to outsiders, wanderers, and dreamers from everywhere and nowhere. You steel yourself for another hour, counting breaths as you dodge another nearly out of control hansom cab. Perhaps, if you really focused, you'd find a way to survive just a bit longer, maybe even make it a second day. But the truth is, London is a city that does not care, one that asks you to run uphill, through smoke and hunger, only to knock you down laughing. If you could flee, if anyone did, what stories did they tell when they finally found a soft bed and a window that opened to clean, quiet air? And so, as dusk begins to smother the city in sticky shadows once more, the choices are clear: endure, adapt, or escape, if you can. But for almost everyone not born on its sooty stones, survival is mostly myth. There's a final, resigned realization maybe everyone here, past or present, just tried to get by one day at a time, hoping for a miracle or a warm meal, and not much else. You step to the side, watching as the crowds blur into a living tide of Londoners, all the more impressive for their grittiness, their noisy, stubborn joy in the face of chaos. As your body aches and your eyes water, you wonder if you'd ever look back on this day, this hard, bewildering, incredible day, as anything but a lesson in humility. Odds are, though, you'd never make it to day two. Feel yourself slowing now, breathing easier, the relentless city noise melting to a drowsy hum that drifts beneath your eyelids like nighttime fog. Picture the glow of gaslight softening sharp corners, the coal smoke fading as if drawn away by a gentle breeze. The walls, those ancient bricks that kept the city tight and crowded, fade to leaving nothing but distant bells, warm lamplight, and the hush of carriages far from whirring. As your heartbeat returns to its safe, slow pace, know that the perils of Victorian London are behind you, mere stories drifting through the night. Let your muscles uncurl, let your anxious imaginings fade. You are home again, wrapped in comfort and calm, sheltered and secure in your own familiar time. Tomorrow will be easier. Rest, knowing adventure can wait. Sweet dreams. Feel yourself slowing now. There's no more need to hurry. The streets behind you fade with every breath, those cobbled lanes, the smoke-streaked sky, the hungry eyes and restless clatter of wheels. They all melt away like mist on morning glass. You are no longer a stranger in a strange time. You are simply here, wherever here means quiet, warmth, and safety. Let your muscles unwind. Let your chest rise slowly and fall even slower. There is no one chasing, no deadline waiting, no questions to answer, only stillness. Imagine your limbs growing heavy with peace, as if your body were sinking gently into something soft, deeper than blankets, like being lowered into warm water, where nothing aches and nothing is expected. The lamps in the old city grow faint now, flickering behind your eyelids like distant stars. The voices blur into lullabies. A far-off bell tolls the hour, but it doesn't call for you, not anymore. Your time of surviving, of watching every corner, of dodging carts and coughing into coal-stained wine, it's over, for now. In its place, quiet, the hush of curtains drawn. The softness of a world that asks nothing but your rest. Let the last bits of tension trickle from your fingertips. Let your breath drift slower, slower still. You've seen enough for one day more than most. You deserve peace. The city is behind you. Ahead, there is only sleep. And in this sleep, there are no gutters or hunger pangs. No constables, no fog, no fear. Only dreams, only stillness. Good night.